guys, my name is Abby and welcome back to a new video. Now, when I made this set, I was so excited for spring and all the nice warm weather, and of course the day that I decided, oh my gosh, I'm gonna film it. It is rainy and cloudy and cold out, but spring is coming and I'm so excited for it. I feel like I can feel myself defrosting and blooming again like a flower. I'm so excited. Spring is my favorite season, hands down, and I feel like it's very obvious also by just all the clothes and things I make that I am such a spring girl. So I feel like I have so many fun ideas coming to mind of things I want to make, and I decided to start off this beautiful 2025 spring season with this really cute blue two-piece set. I'm definitely more of a dress person. I make so many dresses, but I decided I wanted to get better at making tops this year, so I decided to push myself out there and make this really cute Milkmaid style top with this really cute skirt. This set is so beautiful, so darling. I've already worn it out a few times. I absolutely love this skirt, and it's so perfect to wear to work. And I have so many other fun ideas and things I want to make this upcoming spring. But for starters, let's jump right in and see how I made this really cute blue two-piece spring set. I first began with making my top. I'm not the best with making tops, but I decided that it would be so much cuter as a two-piece set rather than a dress. Starting with the bust, I used the center fold of the fabric to cut out a rectangle that was the length of my bust and the width of my bust times 1.5. I made it wider than my normal bust size so that I could gather it, and I cut it out on the fold and then cut the fold open to have two identical pieces. I cut around the top and bottom a bit since I wanted it to be more tapered, closer to my armpit and longer around my bust. Next, I worked on cutting out the thin straps that would be used as a tie in the front of the bust. I cut out two long rectangles and then folded them into fourths to tuck away the raw edge. I made sure to fold in the side raw edge that would be peeking out when the top would be worn. I then sewed down the straps and then took back out my bust pieces. I did a rolled hem along the side of the bust pieces that would be the center front of the top. When those raw edges were tucked away, I began folding down the top edge. I made a channel that would be wide enough to be comfortable to hold the straps, while also making sure to hide away the raw edge from the top. Then I sewed the channel down. Moving on to the waist pieces, I used the fold of the fabric to cut out the center front waist piece. I also used this piece to cut out a second identical one that would be used as the lining. I also cut out the side front pieces, making sure to cut out double for the lining. With all my pieces, I connected both of the waist sides to either side of the waist front. With the waist pieces now connected, I took back out my bust pieces and hand gathered the bottom edge. Sandwiching the gathers between the waist pieces, I sewed them all together, making sure that the gathers were evenly spaced and the waist pieces were right sides together. Using a safety pin to insert in the straps, I made sure to start at the end that would be the middle of the bust, moving towards the sides, and then pinning the strap down when I got to the end to help secure it in place for now. Moving on to the back of the shirt, I made sure that the piece I cut out was long enough for both the bust and waist pieces, since I only wanted to have one large back panel. I first did a rolled hem of both the bottom and top edges, and then I decided that I wanted to shear the back of it, so I used my elastic thread. I was having some trouble getting it to shrink as much as I would like, but we adapt and overcome. I sewed many rows of the elastic along the back, and once the back was all sheared, I took back out the front of my bodice to connect them. I first folded up the bottom raw edge of the waist pieces and stitched that down, tucking them away. I wanted to do a French seam, so I first put them together with the wrong sides together and sewed those down. Once connected, I trimmed down the seam allowance, getting close to the seam but not so close that it would unravel. Then I put them right sides together and sewed that down, with the new seam allowance holding in that raw edge and making the sides of it look clean. Once the main body of the bodice was complete, it was time for the straps. With the tie in the middle of the top, it really doesn't need the straps, but I felt more secure with that extra support. I cut out 2 rectangles to be the straps. I first folded the straps into fourths like the ties, but after sewing it, I realized I did not want to fold the straps into fourths since it would make them bulkier and not as nice. So I instead folded the rectangle in half, right sides together, and sewed them down. Using a safety pin, I turned them right sides out, so the way the raw edge was tucked inside. I sewed them down onto the bodice, making sure to tuck away the raw edges at the end, and then the top was complete. For the skirt, I wanted a slightly gathered effect, but I didn't want it to be super bulky around my waist. Using the fold of the fabric, I cut out my skirt front, having it be more tapered around my waist and flare out towards my feet, but still making sure to give it a few more inches of width to gather it. I repeated this for my skirt backs, once again also using the fold of the fabric, but then cutting it open along the fold so I would have 2 identical pieces. I pinned both skirt backs to either side of the skirt front, making sure to sew and then serge down the seam allowance and side raw edges of the skirt backs. Then, using my hand sewing needle, I did a little running stitch along the top edge of the skirt to gather it. For the waistband, I cut out a rectangle that was the circumference of my waist and wide enough to be folded into fourths. Taking out my iron, I first ironed the waistband in half as a guide, and then folded in each raw edge to that middle part and then ironed those down, and then folded the waistband back in half where I first ironed it, making sure the raw edge was nicely tucked in. I also made sure to fold in the side raw edges of my waistband so that way I wouldn't have to worry about it when connecting it to the skirt. Before pinning the skirt and waist together, I marked where the side seams should be on the waistband with pins to match up with the side seams of the skirt. Inserting the skirt into the waistband, I pinned it down, evenly spacing out my gathers. Before sewing down my waistband, I first added in my zipper. For my zipper, I inserted it between the waistband and folded over the side edges of the skirt back. Once I got towards the bottom, I marked underneath the zipper where they should be connected, and then I made sure to first sew together the bottom of the skirt before securing down my zipper. Once the whole back of the skirt was complete, I then moved on to sewing down my waistband. I decided to serge the bottom raw edge of the skirt to help when attaching the ruffles. To get started on the ruffles, I cut out 3 long strips of fabric that were slightly longer than I wanted them to be, taking into account the hemming. I sewed them together to make a giant tube, making sure to serge down the seam allowance. Along the top edge of the ruffle, I also serged down the raw edge for when I gather it to make the ruffle. Before gathering it, I did a rolled hem along the bottom since it would be easier to sew this now as compared to after it gets gathered. Bringing back out my hand sewing needle, I did a running stitch to gather the top edge of the ruffle. On the bottom of the skirt, I marked where it would be 3 equal parts to help with the spacing of the ruffles evenly. Matching up those side seams of the ruffle strips to where I just marked the 3 parts, I placed the ruffles right sides together on the fabric and evenly spaced them out, making sure to sew them down slowly. Once they were connected, I took out this lacy ruffle trim I had. Since it was already slightly gathered, I just pinned it down over top of the ruffle, and since it was slightly longer, it would peek out from underneath, which I really liked. I first sewed together the sides of the trim, serging down that raw edge, and then I sewed the trim along the bottom. Once it was all secure, the skirt and dress were complete.